good morning, and or good afternoon, as the case might be. Welcome or welcome back, as again, the case might be. My name is Dalibor Petrovic. I'm a partner at Deloitte, and I will be your host for this session. This session is part of our ongoing live webcast series that we have been hosting and bringing to Canadian audiences over the last 2.5 years now. And it is through this channel that we both engage with Canadian tech leaders to share their stories, but also use this channel to bring content that we believe is interesting, relevant, and timely. And it is a great pleasure for me today to be hosting this particular session, which is going to be focused on women in technology and how to do the diversity, equity, and inclusion right. We have gathered a very powerful panel of leaders who are going to be sharing their experiences and their thoughts. Today, we are joined by Shannon Bell. Shannon is a Senior Vice President of IT and Digital at Rogers Communications. Samantha Rahim, the CIO of Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada. Jody McDermott, a partner at Deloitte, as well as Hilary McVey. Hilary is also a partner at Deloitte and leads Deloitte Consulting's DEI's program. So before we start, just a couple of housekeeping points. We would love to engage with you. So I would encourage all of you, the audience members, to use Q&A function of this Zoom platform to submit questions as the conversation unfolds. That's the benefit, of course, of having the live chat. And also, this webcast is intended to be about 1 hour long. We are going to record this session, and I will be distributing the link. So if you'd like to listen to it afterwards, of course, please feel free to do that. Before we start, however, we would like to start with the land acknowledgement, and I would like to ask Hilary if she can do us the honor. So Hilary, over to you.
Thanks, Dalibor. It's my pleasure to be here today. And one of the things we've done at Deloitte is really worked hard with our Deloitte Indigenous team to create personalized territorial land acknowledgements. So I'm going to read you mine, and it's definitely a powerful way of, if your organization hasn't yet done personalized ones, I highly recommend it. So I'm speaking to you today from the unceded territory of the Kitigan, Zibi, Anishinabeg, Algonquin territory, governed by the Crawford's Purchase Treaty of 1782. My name is Hilary McVey. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a partner in consulting at Deloitte. As a white settler, mother, sister, daughter on this land that I call home, I'm grateful to be able to enjoy the beauty of nature in my garden and swim in the lake at my cottage each summer. And I am beyond grateful to the Indigenous people who have since time immemorial loved and cared for this land and continue to do so today. And the gorgeous painting that you see represented there is by Charlene Vickers, who's an Anishinabeg artist. And the title of the painting is Land Grew on the Turtle's Back. And it's a beautiful piece of art that we're really proud hangs in our Deloitte University space. So thank you for that.
That was wonderful, Hilary. That was wonderful. Thank you very much. So maybe let's start with you. Why does this conversation still need to be happening? And what made you get involved in this domain of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and of course, directly linked to it, the domain of women in technology?
It's a great question. I think two things come to mind. The first, I definitely over time had a misperception that with each new generation that entered the workforce, I assumed that this issue would just solve itself. I really thought that we were progressing as a society and that things were changing, and eventually some of the things that I had to deal with as a new grad into the technology workspace would go away. But then I started noticing that each new generation still was struggling with the same challenges. So young women just entering the workforce went through the same type of things that I did. So that was a motivator. But the other thing that stuck with me is definitely people on my team that have had to leave technology as a career because of things like childcare issues,
Mm.
right? And it made me think we need to do a better job of supporting all types of people being able to have careers in technology. So those are my two kind of driving things that keep me very passionate about this topic.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So what we'll do, maybe we'll just introduce our panelists and let them tell their rationale of why they are involved and passionate about this topic. Sam, how about you next?
Sure, sounds good. Well, similarly to Hillary, around, I started in sort of my career in technology in the late 80s, early 90s. And I remember some of the challenges I was going through. And probably around 15 years ago, I sort of thought, oh, this problem's gone away. It doesn't exist to the same degree that it did before, and that new generations weren't going to encounter the same issues that I had encountered when I was at engineering school in university. But then I was having a conversation with some female engineering students, and they were sharing with me some of the issues that they were dealing with, which were exactly the same issues that I was dealing with at work and that I had dealt with when I was an engineering student at school. And what they were talking about was that when they were in their different project teams, and they would be perhaps the only female that was in a group of 5 working on a project, that when they would share their view, that when they would share their opinion, they would be interrupted, people would not listen to their point of view, and essentially their comments would be ignored. And they were asking me for feedback as to what they could do in that situation. And to be honest, for a little bit of time, I was stumped as to what they could do, because I would go through that myself on a daily basis. And that's when I realized that it's important that we continue to have this conversation around diversity, equality, and inclusion, but that we include all in that conversation, because it's just not up to them to say something. It's also up to the men that were part of their project team to speak up and make sure that they're being heard and create a space that they're comfortable in speaking in. So that's one of the reasons I got more involved in this topic.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Samantha. Jody, how about you?
Thank you. So nice to be here and to meet everyone. I'm often asked, should the conversation still happen?
Yeah.
I get quite passionate with my answers. I will temper some of my passion today, but not much. The reality is that right now, as a partner, as a technology partner in consulting at Deloitte, I am right now in the most diverse environment in tech than I've ever been. But there are still many, many times where I am often the only senior female in many of those meetings. And so, I would say in general now, there's a realization that diversity drives better business outcomes. There is no exception when it comes to technology. Technology exists. I have a very simple perspective. Technology exists to solve business problems, and diverse perspectives will ultimately drive better business outcomes through tech. And so, what made me get involved? I don't know that I had a choice. Being a woman in tech, I need to be very, very clear. I had amazing male sponsors, very impactful men in my life who have helped shape my career and helped me be a strong and confident leader today. But I didn't have any senior female leaders as advocates and to draw inspiration from, certainly in tech specifically. So it was hard for me to imagine, what would a career in tech be like? How would I succeed? And quite frankly, how could I stay in tech? And so I continue to push, because we have so much more work to do to get to true diversity in tech, to get to any form of gender parity. But we need to keep pushing beyond that. It's not just gender, but from a BIPOC perspective. I'm in Barcelona right now, and a group of women, we were having this very conversation yesterday. The next wave is BIPOC and further diversity. We're never really done until we have representation, that represents our, the populations we live in. I do also believe that there is an element of education and awareness around some of the societal and family pressures that exist for our women in tech. And that was probably my biggest aha moment early in my career. Sometimes it is the pressures from family or, those around them that can force them out of tech rather than themselves, or, have them questioning whether they stay in tech. So we need to be cognizant of all of those circumstances as well. and the whole environment around our women in tech. So, I got involved by the nature of my gender, but, found a true passion for supporting, diversity of all forms in tech, and will continue to put.
I really appreciate what you just said about this family dynamics. I think it's the Venn diagram that women in tech have to navigate, the work expectation, but also family environment. So this is, I think, a very, very, very sophisticated and wise perspective added. Thank you, Jody, and thanks for joining us from another continent. This
Absolutely.
is I didn't know you were in Barcelona. So
well, Shannon is just up the street from me, so there you go.
Oh, is that right? Excellent. So
we're at the same conference.
Shannon, over to you.
Thanks, Dalibor, and thanks for inviting me. And yes, I'm joining from Barcelona as well, where it's one of the major technology conferences of the year that's happening. And interestingly, there's about 25% women attending, which clearly not good enough. I've spent just over 20 years in technology, and I do think it's an important conversation that needs to continue happening. And I believe, like Jody, it's more than just an equity discussion around females. I think the broader inclusion and diversity discussion is really so critical that we talk about. Personally, what made me get involved is really having lived through so many difficult situations in my career, not having female mentors to look up to, having to tackle those roadblocks myself, and really this overwhelming feeling that I want to make sure that those roadblocks don't exist for other women that are coming up through the ranks and frankly, shouldn't have to experience that. I think when you go through those types of experiences and challenges, it really shapes you and forces you to think about what kind of leader you want to be. And for me, it's one who helps really foster and grow talent and build an organization where diversity and equity and inclusion is a cornerstone and a priority.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, everyone, for sharing your sort of opening remarks of why is this important to you. Hilary, how is tech viewed compared to other functional areas within organization?
I think technology gets a bit of a bad rap, and I'm always interested when I speak to other colleagues in different types of business of what they think we actually do in technology and what the reality is. I think there's a lot of perception around extremely long hours, right? And people working on project-based work that requires working nights and weekends and round the clock. I think that's definitely a big perception that's not correct. And I also think people aren't even aware of all the different aspects of it, and they think that all people do in technology is do coding. And as someone who's been in technology for many decades, I can tell you I've never coded a single line in my life. So I think there's even a lack of understanding of the different components of what makes up technology. So definitely lots of misperceptions out there, and especially when other careers are more interesting to explain and easy to explain, I think technology is a hard one, and it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Yeah, so I'm curious, like when you compare it to sales, marketing, Shannon, in a big organization like Rogers, what do you think the perception of technology is there compared to other parts of the business? What do people think your group is doing?
I think you captured it well. There's lots of different sides to technology, and people know and understand different things. Some people think it's as simplistic as we fix computers, and other people understand that, we're building systems that are supporting customer engagement for millions of Canadians. I think there's two sides to how technology is viewed. And some of it depends on the culture in the organization as well. In organizations where technology can be a place where people want to come. When you're working with the latest technology, we spend a lot of time working on cloud, and I know Jody works on cloud. We work with data, AI, ML, talking a lot about ChatGPT, OpenAI, looking at the metaverse and thinking about that. It can be very exciting and challenging and fun, and I think that's part of what draws people to technology. But, the other side of it is, to your point, it can be perceived as long hours. Sometimes it is. When you're running 24/7 technology operations, that can also be challenging. And so there is a perception that to work in technology, you need a strong support base. And I think that kind of ties back to one of Jody's earlier comments about things that perhaps discourage females throughout their career from being in technology. And so I think, you know, the exciting part of it, new technology, embracing that maybe draws people in. And then sometimes that balance of it's not all the exciting stuff, there's the reality as well of running technology can sometimes drive people away. And it's a balance.
Yeah, yeah. So Jody, does tech then have an image problem?
I'll get off mute. Absolutely. I'm going to be pretty direct and say absolutely, no question. And to be honest, there are some truths to that. I would say every job has some non-glamorous parts, whether in tech or not. You know, when you're in the throes of software delivery, you really don't have the option of walking away and saying, I'll come back later to solve that problem. You know, and technology is I kind of view it as the hard pieces of the puzzle that come together to drive the business outcomes that organizations need. And when you are the hard pieces of the puzzle, it's kind of hard not to be there in those moments of truth. And nobody wants to be on calls early hours of the morning or testing, you know, through a weekend. Nobody does. But the reality is I actually spent my 20 years in industry before joining Deloitte 7 years ago, about half on the business side, half on the IT side. And I was just as much on those calls as the business counterpart trying to work through those problems. So any role in tech and tech implementation, there's going to be some non-glamorous parts, but I'd also argue that's not, you know, specific to IT. You know, I've had things like, well, IT, you're a cost center, you're not the revenue generating part of the organization. Okay, but we all know that tech drives those business outcomes and results to generate the revenue. So there's a number of ways that it can be perceived as non-glamorous. You know, the reality is that all parts of an organization go through, you know, peaks and valleys. Hillary, you know, peaks and valleys. Hillary, you kind of talked about some of those long working hours, you know, and that can be true. But what I realized is that what I loved about tech is you are the creator of those puzzle pieces that come together to drive those business outcomes. And quite frankly, I learned that technology, like there is no place that I would rather be than in a position to leverage technology to be able to figure out those problems. And technology is what's pulling us into the future. Shannon, you just nailed it. Look at ChatGPT, generative AI in general, all of these trends that are emerging, all technology driven. And so you get to solve these big, wicked problems. And sure, the hours can be long, but I really believe that some of the image problems, you know, we do need to myth bust because it is not non-glamorous. In fact, I've learned it's actually quite the opposite, in my opinion.
Sam.
If I could add on to that.
Please.
So, you know, I think exactly what Jody said. Technology is very exciting to be in right now with all the new technology innovations. But I think, you know, we're in the industry, we're seeing it, we're part of it. And I think a bit of what we need to think about is what is the image that the next generation has about technology? What is it that the high school students are thinking about when they think about technology, if they even think about technology? And I think about media and what the kids are nowadays exposed to. I think about Big Bang Theory. So if we take a moment, everyone on this call, and you think about the last time you watched a show and it had technology people in it, what did they look like? How did they act? What was the impression you got from that? And we're not necessarily seeing that diversity in the social media that we need to as to what technology is and what the people in technology can be. One thing that really impacted me was in 2015, there was a software developer that took part in a recruiting commercial for her company. And her name was Isis Anchali. And so she took part in this video. She was the software engineer. They posted the video. And after it was posted, there were so many comments back because people were like, how did you get a model? Why did you get a model to do this commercial? Because they couldn't believe that someone that had her appearance could actually be a software engineer. And that's just so, it's so hard to comprehend that. And she actually started a campaign, which is I look like an engineer. And all these individuals, no matter what their gender was, no matter what their background was, started to post photos of themselves and saying that I am an engineer. Because, you know, Jody talked about the importance of technology, the importance of diversity, because diversity breeds creativity. And I think it's really our job to not just make sure we're having these conversations with ourselves, but we're promoting those conversations within the younger generation so that they are realizing that technology exists and technology is a career for them, no matter whether they are female, male, transgender, two-spirited, no matter their background, no matter their interest, be it technology or non-technology sort of thing, they can still pursue a career in this area.
Yes, and as a matter of fact, we are tracking the evolution of the role of technology and the role of technology leaders, and it is evident. Like every pointer showcases that technology, of course, is now immersed in every aspect of the business, actually, obviously, in every aspect of life. So, what technology career would have looked like 30 years ago, and what technology career today is, and what technology career 5 years from now will be, are dramatically different propositions. So I would love to hear thoughts, maybe Samantha, on how does this resonate perhaps with female grads and students? What is the image that we are projecting about this industry to female students and grads?
And what I'm actually going to talk about is just more an experience that I had. So,
sure, please do.
So my daughter is in high school. She's going to kill me for talking about her on a large panel, but I'm going to do it anyway. So she took grade 11 programming. A mom that's in technology, of course, encourages their children to look at programming. And what I was surprised about was she was the only female out of 22 that took grade 11 coding. There were 2 classes, and in both classes, there were 1 female. And I think what that means is that we have work to do. We have work to do at the younger generation to make sure that they understand the appeal of technology, that they need to think about coding, that they need to think about technology in whatever they're looking at, and that we have to make sure that we're reaching out to those younger individuals and sharing with them what can be a career in technology, that, you know, you're not necessarily writing code. You could be a BRM that's talking to the business and explaining what the technology means to them. So I think we do have a lot of work to do in improving that image. And we have to figure out more means and more things like this, where we get out to larger audiences, so that I encourage everyone when they go home and they're speaking to their kids tonight, or they're speaking to their nieces and nephews or other people, that they talk about technology as a career option, and they talk about some of what they've heard today on the call.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think, Jody, you might have an interesting story on this area as well.
I do. I think, you know, it's interesting because I am a super proud woman in tech, and I do not have a degree in tech. I have, you know, I graduated university with a French and business degree, and my first job, I was hired to answer the phones because I spoke French. I never did answer the phone. That's another story. But, you know, I found my spark for technology when I was actually on the business side. I was involved in launching a contact center years and years ago. I won't say how many years ago, but a lot of years ago. And we got a 1-800 number and we launched. And we quickly realized that 1.5-hour wait times in the contact center wasn't going to run the business, but we were a small startup. We were doing what we needed to do. So you quickly realize you can't run a business without technology, without a full suite of tools to support it. And so I loved learning how to make the business case for technology, and, you know, worked with IT to implement those tools to help automate the contact center, to ensure there was efficient routing to the right agent for the right call. And I was hooked, completely hooked. From that moment on, even though I wasn't even in IT at that point just yet, I was absolutely a woman in tech. And so it kind of changed my perspective. So there's no question, and Sam, like I actually really agree with you. If we look at the STEM rates and the coders, the engineers, the developers, those really technical skills, or we'll I guess call it STEM, we have so much more work to do. But I also believe, we need to expand the lens of what being a woman in tech is. The way I think about it is you need a passion for solving big, wicked problems, as I always call them, and to understand the technology that exists, and you can solve those problems in so many different ways. I think, for any of us, we would agree there is always a solution with technology. You can make technology do anything you want it to do to a certain extent, but really, how are you going to solve that problem? And that's what I love about tech. There's never only one answer. So in terms of the image that we're projecting, I think we absolutely have some work to do. We need those hardcore skills. We need far more women in those STEM programs. But we need diversity of skills in tech just as much, diversity of backgrounds in tech. I hope and like to think I'm an effective woman in tech, but once again, I don't have a technical degree. And so, I'll recall a great conversation that I had, in one of our Deloitte floors with a Queen's Commerce grad who had just joined our firm. And she wasn't sure what she wanted to do. And I literally just said, "Hi, I'm Jody, who are you?" and introduced myself. And we probably spent about 15 minutes chatting. And I saw a bit of a light go off that she could absolutely get involved in tech, and she didn't have to have graduated with a technical degree to do that. I'm still in touch, and I'm thrilled to say that she's found a spark around technology, and I do believe that she will become a woman in tech. And so there are so many ways we can get contribution into tech from a diverse set of backgrounds, and I remain pretty excited about that. So I just kind of have a different view. We need those hard skills, but we also need diversity of skills.
That is actually a very powerful aha moment, I think, for many people. I have a pleasure of interacting with CIOs across the country, and what I know is that a minority of them actually come from comp science background. We have in Canada, at the top tier level of tech executives, people who are accountants, engineers, lawyers, but also teachers, artists who navigated their career. And we, I think, forget that. We forget that. So what you just said, Jody, about thinking of technology career as a much broader than software development.
Are we losing Dalibor? Is it just me?
I'm sure he's going to pop back.
Okay.
Jody, I was going to jump. Oh, Dalibor's back.
Go ahead.
We lost you for a bit, Dalibor.
That's okay.
I was
no problem.
going to say, at the heart, I think, Jody, you talked about a couple points that if you put them together, it's really, I think, part of the solution of how we solve the image problem. So at its heart, technical degree, non-technical degree, what technology is about, my firm belief is it's about problem solving. Yeah. And some of the best technologists I know are amazing problem solvers. And that is the number one skill I look for when we hire people. Are they good problem solvers? Because guess what? You can learn technology. And I think that's a critical skill. And I think in terms of the image of tech, I think that you touched on the importance of business. And I think for a long time, and certainly through my career, I've seen people working on tech for tech's sake and kind of in a silo, disconnected from the business. And I think one of the reasons many women that I've worked with in my career have been very successful is they're natural relationship builders and collaborators, and they build those bridges with the business. So all of a sudden you have an organization that's actually building technology to drive business outcomes or solve business problems, as you said, Jody. And so I think that in and of itself kind of connects a dot that makes tech interesting and exciting for people to come, because you're not just building the next, microservice, you're actually building a technology solution that's going to enable the business to, interact with the customer or do something different. So I think that's a piece of it. And then you touched on the STEM, and it's encouraging to see how much focus there is in elementary and high school around STEM programs. That's great. It will take time to drive the results for sure. But once that translates into more females, going into university programs around technology or exploring technology as a career, then the image piece becomes super important in terms of keeping them there or making them believe that they can be successful. So I feel like all those pieces are really tightly intertwined. And I think the story that Sam shared and certainly what you touched on kind of connects the dots for me in that area.
Excellent. So let's move to some pragmatic discussion. What are the most innovative things that you've seen organizations do to address this and improve this balance? Maybe Hillary, we can start with you, given that you lead this particular domain for Deloitte Consulting.
There's so many exciting things to talk about. I'll try and keep it to a manageable list. I could chew up the rest of the half an hour. I'm just kidding. So the first thing I've seen is really impressive programs out in the market space. The one that I'd love to highlight that we've been lucky enough to partner with is YWCA Hamilton's Uplift program. They are retooling women into different careers, as well as new Canadian women who've just moved to Canada into amazing careers in data analytics and web development skills. And I've had the pleasure of getting to know a lot of the women through the program. They're incredibly passionate about retooling themselves, and it's been really exciting to watch all these new folks get into technology that were never a part of it. So that's one. I think some other things we've tried that have been tremendously successful. One is a reverse mentoring program. So taking people at the more junior parts of an organization and having them mentor upwards with leaders to kind of make sure there's an awareness of how to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion and help our leaders become even better in this space. We've also built dashboards. We're all big on technology and tracking who's doing what. So dashboards are a really great way of finding pockets of the business that are doing really well and helping encourage other parts of the business. But then the last two are probably more tangible that I'll mention. One is our sponsorship program. What we find is often women who are new to an organization are just building out their network. They don't know where they could actually get involved. So we've actually got a program that partners them up with an executive and helps them find different ways to get involved in the organization. It's been incredibly successful. And then finally, just leadership hiring targets, right? Every organization with the Great Resignation is having to do a lot of hiring. So I think putting really explicit guidance around what you're looking for from a sourcing point of view can really lead to, it's not easy, but if sort of what gets measured gets done, is the old adage. I should stop, but someone else can share some good things.
So leadership hiring targets and dashboards that tell the truth.
Yeah.
And what gets measured gets done. As soon as you mentioned that sort of came to my mind. Why don't we go around the horn with the same question? What are the most innovative things you've seen organizations do to succeed or to improve? Sam, how about you?
Yeah. So one of the things that I've seen recently, quite often when we talk about diversity and equity, it's often the women who are in technology or the underrepresented groups, and the responsibility falls upon them to have the conversation. And I think one of the things that I've seen recently is some sessions that weren't actually geared towards the underrepresented groups. They're actually geared towards the majority and sort of talking about what it is that the majority can do to put forward the whole idea around diversity and equity and inclusion. And there's this website out there called leanin.org, and they have this whole session around male allyship that actually has slides and things that are really designed around what is it that men can do when they're in situations and they see unconscious biases coming out, or they see women being ignored in meetings. It doesn't just fall to the female within the meeting that is being ignored to do something about it. It falls upon everyone that is in that session to call it out, to say something. I think about Hillary Clinton and her famous statement at the United Nations where she talked about women's right being human rights. And I think that applies to diversity and equity. It is not just the responsibility of the underrepresented groups. It is the responsibility of everyone to now stand up and do something. And I have to say, Hillary, I loved that idea of the reverse mentoring program as well. I think that sort of falls to that path as well. It's also the responsibility of the younger generation to educate the older generation as well as culture and society evolves. So I think that was a great idea that I just wanted to mention. But I'm not sure, Shannon, I think you had talked about some interesting thing around new grads earlier when we spoke.
Yeah, definitely. And I need to call out the allyship because I think it's so important. And I'm really glad you touched on it. And I think that, you know, when I talk to some of our I&D councils and our teams about what we can do better, you know, often that theme of allyship and speaking up comes up. And so, I mean, you shared a great anecdote there. And I think, you know, you sit in those discussions and something's said, and it's really our responsibility to speak up and model the behaviors that we want to see. But you know, I've had many tremendous male colleagues who've spoke up as well, and I really appreciate that. And I think male allyship is great. I think on the new grad side, you know, when I think about innovative things that we've done, we've invested a lot in a new grad program, and I think that's critical to building the ecosystem and growing talent. Yep. And then getting new grads to sponsor and mentor new grads. So kind of a little bit tied to what Hillary said on reverse mentoring, that helps grow the ecosystem. And once you've invested in the program for a few years, you know, I'm certainly very lucky now to have a strong new grad community that continues to help build the program and also ensures we put the right focus on areas of inclusion and diversity and equity. And a great example of this is two of our recent new grads approached me a few months ago and wanted me to be the executive sponsor for Women in Tech, and they were going to take on the co-chair role. And I'm learning from them every single day. They're doing a phenomenal job. They're running sessions. They're getting hundreds of attendees, you know, women to come and learn to program in Python and other topics that are interesting. But it's been as much a learning experience for me while seeing them thrive in those roles. And so I think community is very important and empowering people who really want to make a difference. So those things can pay massive dividends.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Very, very insightful. Jody, anything you'd like?
I have to echo. I mean, community is huge, Shannon. I think it gives that, you know, those shared experiences a forum for people to learn and to gain support. So I would wholeheartedly, you know, give a thumbs up to that, or the applause through Zoom. You know, it's there's a lot of great examples of creative and innovative things that I've seen. You know, I think I would call out our, you know, Deloitte risk advisory team. I'm just so proud of that team for one of their recent kind of targeted training programs. And I specifically didn't say targeted hiring program, but I'll tell you a little bit more about that. So in this case, our risk advisory team took a look at, you know, a scarce technical skill in market. And in this case, it was specifically Google Cloud. So it's growing rapidly in Canada. It can be very difficult to find people that are certified that know Google Cloud. And so the Deloitte risk advisory team recently launched a Google Cloud certification training program. But the kicker is they didn't do that for Deloitte employees in this case. What they did is they opened up 100 positions for non-Deloitte employees to get trained and certified on Google Cloud. And they received 1,500 applicants. And what they did is they strived to match those 100 candidates that would be selected for the program with our diversity targets. And so the end result, I am so proud to say, was 51% female were accepted into the program. In addition, though, we have 6% Indigenous going through the program as well. And so now, of course, we hope that many of these folks will choose to join Deloitte at the end of the program. You know, we're investing, it's about a 3-month program, as I said, but that's not a condition of their application. It will be their choice. And so if you think about it, either way, the end outcome is positive. We have more diverse technical skills in the Canadian market, and or we have more diverse technical capacity in Deloitte because they've chosen to join Deloitte. But really, either way, it's a win-win. And so I think that's probably one of the most creative approaches I've seen. There's been a number of them, but that one really kind of stood out for me.
This is excellent. And what I'm taking away from what I've just heard from all four of you is that it doesn't necessarily take massive investment. It doesn't even need permission. It needs ideas and people who have interests to bring people together to solve for this. Communities, ecosystems, women in tech, women in tech groups, connecting within organizations, outside of the organizations. Those are all things that they don't cost any money. They don't require any permissions. They require just people to recognize importance and choose to sort of lean in. And I believe that many, many leaders, of course, of our Canadian organizations do understand the criticality of this and importance of this and would support. So my encouragement to everybody who is listening is do come up with ideas of your own, as well as, of course, hearing what our panelists shared. Do think about how can this be of value to you. I would love for us to talk more about actionable items that people can do. So again, Hillary, you represent our DEI practice. Can you start us off in what do you think are the top actionable things people should consider doing?
Yeah, there's so many different things that I'd love to share. So first, I would say it's really important to have positivity, right? So this is a hard space to fix. It's a hard thing. And often we get conditioned to look for problems that can be solved within a quarter, within a fiscal year, within 6 months, within a year. So some of these things that are going to take multi-years to solve, keeping that energy and enthusiasm high the whole way through, very important to celebrate any incremental wins, right? Celebrating 1% of an improvement is something worth celebrating, right? And I think sometimes we have to remind ourselves of that. So I think the other thing that we can do is, especially for a lot of women in technology already that are generally quite busy with their home lives and work lives, wherever they can, use things like social media to show the fun that they're having at work, the number of women that they get to work with in their organization. And basically, if I was to boil it down, just be more visible. I'm lucky I get to work with a lot of colleagues, and we use this technique to show new people coming into the market that it is fun to work in this space. But I also think it also comes down to very practical conversations. And I notice a lot of male allies very hesitant to have conversations with the women on their team about what their challenges are around childcare, what their challenges are around family elder care, whatever it is. And I would encourage leaders to have more candid, honest conversations, and don't wait for someone on your team to approach you. Approach them proactively and just say, hey, this isn't our usual conversation, but I was just wondering, how do you balance it all? Is there anything I can be doing to help support that? And otherwise, you have people coming to you when it's too late, right? They've already made the decision to leave the organization or switch out of your group to do something else. If you bring to them proactively, often you'll be surprised at the conversations that can come up. But I think the big thing is, I love what we talked about, Shannon, your example of using new grads. What I've seen in this space, the number one thing is don't just make it be leaders coming up with ideas, make it be all levels within an organization, right? It's such a complex issue. It can't just be a top-down solution. It needs to also be bottom-up. And I found the most creative solutions that come up are from brand new folks into technology that just have great new ways of looking at things. And finally, I'll just say one last thing. Don't measure just once a year. Right? Don't just sort of kick off your year and say, here's what our plan is, and then look at it again at the end of the year. Look at it incrementally throughout the year. So you can see trends as they emerge, as opposed to waiting until the end of the year and being surprised when you're like, wait a minute, we were doing better last year. What happened with our representation? So I think it's really important to keep close to the numbers. Who am I going to turn it over to? Who wants to go next?
Let's go to Sam.
Sam.
Sounds good. And actually, I'm going to answer one of the questions that was in the chat with my answer as well. I'm sort of building a little bit on what Hillary said, which is to say something and to ask the questions. So for me, one of the actionable items is all of us who are also allies, all of the people in the audience who are allies, who may be male, who may be female, who may be no matter who you are, you have a role of an ally to speak up, and really calling upon everyone to speak up when they're in that environment. One of the things that I've done is I've spoken to some male counterparts that I have relationships with, that I've seen as sponsors, and I've said, when we're in a meeting and if I'm being ignored, I give you the space and I give you the ability to stand up and to bring the conversation back to me. So that, because it doesn't always fall upon me to say, hey, you ignored me, you didn't think about what I said. It also falls upon my counterparts that are in the meeting. So I've actually reached out to them and said, please, if you see I'm being ignored, say something, do something. Because I think what people don't realize is if you ignore that situation, it doesn't just impact us for that one situation, it impacts us going forward. Because at the next meeting, I may not speak up. So it's very important that we, as allies, take our responsibility serious and that we speak up for others when we're in those situations. And one of the things that you can do as a female leader is reach out and find some allies that exist so that they can also speak up for you.
And that requires that the organizational culture is safe. The people feel safe to call such behaviors out. So I don't know if anyone has any sort of thoughts or reflections on that, and any advice perhaps on that, in because what you just mentioned, yes, we did get a question through Q&A about, what do you do if you feel you're steamrolled over or ignored? I think your answer was very, very, very good, Samantha. Does anyone have any other thoughts about what could we all do differently to ensure safety in calling out, behaviors like this?
I think it's so important to create an environment where people talk, but also, you have to model the behaviors that you want people to emulate, and you have to coach your peers in terms of situations where maybe someone said something inappropriate, or you think they should have responded in a different way. Once people see that behavior reflected, then they will start to feel safe. But changing a culture takes a lot of time, and I think that's the big challenge. Is it's constant work every day, and one small comment can set you back a ways, and that's hard. So I do think one of the things that we can all do, and we can coach our allies to do as well, is call on the people who might not have the confidence to speak up in a meeting, or who are being ignored or steamrolled. Stand up for them, or help to bring the conversation back to a more constructive level if it's going down a path that's not constructive. And I think it's super important to ask questions, pay attention, listen, and give people that opportunity to explain something without feeling judged, or provide context in a situation. And I think as leaders, if we're transparent and accessible and we model that behavior, then people will feel more and more confident to speak up. And when they speak up, praise them. Provide that positive reinforcement, build on what they're saying, or find ways to take that forward, because that will then build and build and build the culture that you want to build. And I think, the culture and community for me are the two most important things to making sure that people feel empowered to drive change. Yeah. And so it's, needing to find those advocates and allies and sponsors is super important, because it's not something you can do alone. And it's also, it's a heavy weight to bear if you're trying to do it all alone. So I think having the open conversation, asking others for help, trying to promote those right behaviors, and understanding that it's going to take time with constant reinforcement of what those critical principles are.
Yeah, I think that's super well said. I don't think, Dalibor, that I would, I agree with everything that's been said. I think if I come back to the original question around, what is something that everybody can do beyond the great points that have already been made around, especially creating, a safe environment where, everyone can be their authentic selves. I would say, my gosh, just lean in, pave the way. For anyone that knows me, I have no tolerance, and I mean no tolerance for complacency. I don't understand it. Ambivalence and complacency is not an option. And so, you have to seek to understand the full set of circumstances that surround each of those women in tech that you work with, that you coach, that you meet with, that you randomly introduce yourself, to. Every one of their stories is going to be different. We've heard about childcare challenges from Hillary. It could be fertility challenges. Maybe it's family pressures. Maybe it's self-doubt. Maybe it's a misperception that they're not technical enough. Whatever it is, you create that safe conversation so that you can enable them to find their spark. Because that is so important. And I've said to almost anyone that's ever been on my team, find your spark. If you do not love what you do, go do something else and I'll help you get there. But that takes effort as a leader. And Shannon, I think you nailed it. You've got to listen. You have to ask the questions. If you sit back and assume that a voice will raise itself or that a hand will put itself up, to be honest, shame on you as a leader. However, as a team member, I also got great coaching early on. I could not assume that those leaders understood my situation and what was going to drive me. So there is a certain amount of responsibility to just ensure that people understand what your big rocks are, what your fundamental values and what drives you so that they can be better leaders. I can say, bottom of my heart, I strive to be a good leader, but I also don't know what I don't know. And so making it as much of a two-way conversation as possible, I'd say is super important.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Jody, now that you have the podium, I have a question that actually came from the audience. And I know that you have a son who is in high school. The question is about high school students. They seem to be pressured to think they have to choose what they have to do for the rest of their lives, at that age. What advice would you give them?
Well, I just looked at the Q&A, and a big hello to Nindu, who has submitted the question. Our youngest sons are actually in the same class. So that's great that you steered that question my way, Dalibor, and maybe Nindu, we can further talk about it on a dog walk. But at the end of the day, I mean, listen, there is way more pressure, I think, on our high school students than I ever felt. So what I try to do is, whether it's a high school student, whether it's a student that's already in university questioning the decision that they've made, I always have a philosophy that you're actually not making a decision for life. Now, there are some exceptions. If you want to be a doctor, you've got to commit early, but if you're talking about, computer science or a business degree, there are universities that offer both. There are great programs that have a combination of business and tech. And so if you're not sure, there are ways that you can, pave the path a little bit less clearly. But I do find that high school students are there's a lot of pressure to decide which school, which courses, what are you going to major in? It's not a decision for life. And with my boys, I actually remind them of that. You will have options. In fact, can I ask for the women on the panel? I think only one of us has a STEM degree. Am I remembering that properly? Hillary, your degree was in what?
I thought I was the Queen's Commerce person you were talking about earlier.
Well, the new grad, I mean, you look youthful, but I think Shannon, you were in journalism, and I think Sam, you're the only one with a STEM degree of the 4 women in tech here on the panel. Mm-hmm. So, I try to, although my sons truly don't understand what I do, I try to remind them that what's really, really key is building those fundamental skills, those habits, the ability to learn. Curiosity cannot be taught. Are you seeing those patterns around curiosity? Because I was so blessed early on in my career when I was thrown into things that I was completely unqualified for on paper, but then I learned I was either going to sink or swim. And you know what? Despite some failures, I swam every time. And so it's not a lifetime commitment. It's not a lifetime decision. They do need to get their act together and get good marks and get into a good school to build those habits to be able to, et cetera, or find a trade they like to do. But at the end of the day, they shouldn't be completely non-committal, but it's also not a lifetime decision. And I think we need to, honestly, I'm literally setting up time with the guidance counselor at my son's high school next week to have that conversation around, you know, that the messaging needs to be a little bit more, you will be able to make decisions later on in life. You're not committing to a lifelong career at this point. And I do think our younger generation is a little bit, you know, more fearless in terms of jumping from one organization to the next. My generation was more lifelong commitment. You are making a decision. I just try to reinforce it. And I've lived by example. Even in the same company for 20 years, I jumped business IT and moved all over. So, you know, I hope that's helpful.
That is, thank you very much for sharing that. And, you know, I've got kids in high school, exactly the same conversation. We got an interesting question on what can organizations do to help not just women, but in general, all employees with work-life balance, burnout, mental health, imposter syndrome. So I'm just going to reflect on one thing that is actually coming to this channel same time next week, so March the 8th. As we unpack our tech trends, one of the trends that we have documented is about how do leading global organizations think about attracting, retaining, and building tech talent. And the answer is in one word: flexibility. So the whole trend is called flexibility, the best ability. And it's flexibility not only from the perspective of a talent person, an employee who needs to be flexible, curious, willing to learn, willing to explore, but flexibility from the organizational standpoint. And when these two flexibilities come together, I think that is the part of that answer. So I would like to invite everyone to please come next week as we delve deeper into that particular trend that we call flexibility, the best ability. And now, in the last few minutes, I'll just open up to the rest of the panel. If they have any other sort of reflections, thoughts, closing remarks on this whole topic, and maybe we'll just quickly go around the horn. If you don't mind, maybe Shannon, I'll pass it on to you. Then we go to Samantha, and then we wrap up with Hillary.
Yeah, of course. First and foremost, thank you to all of the fabulous women that joined, and to you, Dalibor, for hosting the conversation, because I think the one thing we all said was we need to talk about this, and we need to continue to have the conversation, build the community, make people comfortable raising the difficult topics, and growing the support around the organization. And so I think for me, that's, you know, kind of one of my key takeaways is, you know, I'm not alone. Sometimes it's hard in technology, you feel alone, but when you reach out, when you ask for help, when you look for allies, mentors, sponsors, you know, I've never once been turned down when I ask someone for help or I ask someone to sponsor me. So I think that's a key for me. And again, thank you.
Yeah, and I would like to say the same thing. Thank you very much for hosting this event. It's events like this that get the conversation going, where you have the different perspectives, where you have the diversity that comes through. I had the pleasure of having amazing panelists with me, and I think it's really this conversation. So a big thank you, Dalibor, for hosting it and setting it up and all the work, because I think it's through things like this that we will see change occur. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Hillary, you want to take us home?
I think I'll just say, you know, next week is many organizations host events around International Women's Day, and it's kind of become more of a thing the last few years. So it's great to see that, and it's a great chance for people to be very visible. But back on your last question around work-life integration and burnout and all that good stuff, it's a really hot topic right now. And I will just say, the people who don't have workaholic tendencies just don't show it off. The people who are more visible in every organization are the people who proudly say they were online until midnight, logging in at 4 a.m., working all weekend. But I would say the bulk of people are not doing that. They're just being more discreet. So I'm a proud person who I am not a workaholic. So I think we have to be more careful to share the positive messages as well, not just reward
sure.
people who do
Very
those
good point.
extra
For
hours.
sure. There's one really quick thing I'd love to add. So you know that I'm in Barcelona this week for a conference. Walking around the Gothic Quarter, we stumbled across this great wall with quotes from female rebels. And if you can indulge me, one of them was from Angela Davis, who's an American political activist. And she said, "I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I'm changing the things I cannot accept." And that is what a lack of diversity. I cannot accept it. Many of us can't. And so there's so many things we can be doing. Dalibor, thank you so much, and Hillary for organizing this. Sam and Shannon, so privileged to be, with you on the panel. And once again, this is just a conversation that will continue and continue and continue. And Hillary, to your point, you can continue to check in, continue to make progress. And thank you so much for setting up today.
I could not. There's no better way to close than that statement you just made, Jody. So all I would like to say is thank you all very much to our audience. Thank you for spending an hour with us. Look forward to seeing you next week, same time, same channel, and have yourselves all a lovely Wednesday.
Have a great day, folks.
Ta-ta.